Feel like you fit in here.
You get used to it.
On a warm summer evening, surrounded by laughter that was not his own, come to the party smiling. But nobody noticed the moment the smile started to fade.
He had spent 2 years learning what it felt like to be overlooked in a crowded room, and he was not about to let someone else feel it tonight. No one else at the party would ever know what was said in that quiet corner, but everything about that evening was about to change. Began as a single quiet gesture at a crowded party, would soon become something neither of them expected.
If you have ever stood in a room full of people and still felt completely alone, this story is for you. And if it moves you even a little, do us a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the very end, because what happens between these two quiet strangers will stay with you long after the video ends. Daniel Cole had not wanted to go to the party at all. It was his neighbor Marcus's 40th birthday, the kind of backyard gathering with string lights, a rented speaker system, and too much potato salad, and under normal circumstances Daniel would have made an excuse and stayed home with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. But Lily was at her grandmother's for the weekend, and the empty house had started to feel less like peace and more like a held breath. So he had put on a clean shirt, grabbed a bottle of sparkling water because he no longer drank at parties where he might need to drive home to an empty house and think clearly about it, and walked the 3 blocks to Marcus's backyard. 2 years earlier, Daniel's wife had left, not through death, which people at least knew how to talk about, but through a slow unraveling that ended with a note on the kitchen counter and a signature on a set of divorce papers 6 months later. She had not wanted to be a mother, not really, not once the romance of it wore off, and she had said as much to him one night in a voice so flat it had frightened him more than if she'd screamed it. Daniel had spent the 2 years since rebuilding a life that could hold a little girl steady even when the ground beneath him did not feel steady at all. He had learned to braid hair badly but earnestly, to pack lunches with notes tucked inside, to sit through parent-teacher conferences alone while other parents arrived in pairs. He had learned, most of all, what it felt like to walk into a room and feel like the only person there who did not belong to anyone. So when he arrived at Marcus's party and scanned the crowd out of habit, more than curiosity, he was not looking for anyone in particular. He was looking, as he always did now, for the exits, the quiet corners where a person could stand without having to perform happiness they did not feel. And it was in scanning for those quiet corners that he saw her. She was sitting on a wooden bench at the far edge of the yard, past the reach of the string lights, half in shadow. She had a drink in her hand that she was not drinking, and she was smiling in the specific, practiced way of someone who has learned to smile so that no one asks if she is all right. Daniel recognized that smile because he had spent 2 years perfecting one just like it. He asked Marcus's wife, quietly, who the woman on the bench was, and the answer came back in the offhand way people deliver information they do not think is important. Her name was Elena. She had just moved into the neighborhood a few months ago with her son Oliver, who was 6. Her husband had died in a car accident when Oliver was 3, and since then she mostly kept to herself. She had come to the party because her new neighbor had insisted, and Marcus's wife thought it might be good for her to get out, though from the look of things, it did not seem to be working. Daniel stood by the drink table for a long moment, turning his glass in his hand, telling himself it was not his business, that a woman sitting alone at a party was not an emergency, that he did not know her and had no right to intrude on whatever grief or fatigue kept her separate from the noise. But he also remembered, vividly, the first party he had gone to after his wife left, a colleague's holiday gathering he had attended out of obligation, where he had stood by a bookshelf for 45 minutes pretending to be deeply interested in the spines of novels he had already read, because standing there was easier than standing in a group of people who would ask questions he did not want to answer. No one had come to talk to him that night. He remembered how long 45 minutes could feel, so he crossed the yard. He did not rush, and he did not make it a performance. He simply walked, glass in hand, toward the bench where Elena sat, and when he was close enough, he asked if the seat beside her was taken. She looked up at him with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite relief, but something caught in between, as if she had forgotten that people still asked permission before sitting down next to a stranger. She said it wasn't. And he sat, leaving a respectful distance between them, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. They simply looked out at the same party from the same quiet distance, and there was something oddly comfortable in that shared silence, the way two people can be alone together without it being lonely. It was Daniel who spoke first, and he did not ask her the questions people usually ask at parties. Not what she did for work, not how she knew the host. Instead, he asked her, nodding toward the crowd, whether she found parties exhausting in the specific way where you have to hold your face a certain way for hours. She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and said that was exactly it, and asked how he knew. He told her simply that he had been doing the same thing all evening. Something in his honesty seemed to loosen something in her, because the conversation that followed was unlike any small talk either of them had made in a long time. She told him eventually in pieces, about Oliver, about the move, about how grief did not so much disappear as change shape over time, becoming something you carried differently rather than something you set down. She told him she had come to the party because a well-meaning neighbor said it would be good for her, and she had agreed because she was tired of disappointing people who were only trying to help, but that she had spent most of the evening counting the minutes until it would be socially acceptable to leave. Daniel told her, in turn, about Lily, about the note on the counter, about learning to braid hair from internet videos at 11 at night after his daughter had gone to bed so he wouldn't fumble it in the morning. He told her about the bookshelf at the holiday party and the 45 minutes no one had interrupted. Elena looked at him for a long moment after that, and something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, but something quieter and more honest than a smile, a kind of recognition. She said that she did not think anyone at this party had noticed she was struggling except him, and Daniel said that was because most people only look at a room the way they want to see it, not the way it actually is. He said he had gotten very good, out of necessity, at noticing the people standing at the edges because he had spent a long time being one of them. They talked for over an hour, long after the sun had gone down and the string lights had become the only light in the yard. They talked about the specific, unglamorous work of raising a child alone, the school pickup lines, the birthday parties where you are the only single parent, the particular ache of the moments when your child asks a question about the parent who is gone, and you have to find an answer that is honest without being a wound. They found in each other something neither of them had realized they were missing. Someone who did not need the situation explained, because they were living something close enough to understand it without translation. When the party began to wind down, Marcus came over, delighted and a little too obvious about it, to ask if they had met before. Daniel said no, they had just met tonight, and there was something in the way he said it. Quiet, a little stunned, as if he were still catching up to what had happened. That made Marcus grin and walk away without pressing further. Elena stood to leave, and for a moment neither of them knew how to end the conversation, because it did not feel like the kind of conversation that was supposed to end. Daniel asked, carefully, not wanting to overstep, whether she might want to get coffee sometime, and added, quickly, that he understood if that felt like too much too soon, that he was not trying to rush anything, that he knew what it was like to have people push you toward moving on before you were ready. Elena was quiet for a moment, and then she said that Oliver had a school event on Saturday morning, a small fair with games and a bake sale, and that if Daniel and Lily wanted to come, they would be there. It was not exactly a date, she said, almost apologetically, and Daniel said that was all right, that he was not in a hurry, that some things were better built slowly. Saturday came, and Daniel brought Lily to the school fair, feeling nervous in a way he had not felt in years, the particular nervousness of hoping two children will like each other as much as their parents seem to. He needn't have worried. Lily and Oliver found each other at the ring toss booth within 10 minutes and were inseparable for the rest of the morning, running between booths, comparing prizes, laughing in the easy, unguarded way children laugh when they have decided someone is their friend. Daniel and Elena stood near the edge of the fair watching them, and Elena said quietly that she had not seen Oliver laugh like that in a long time. Daniel said the same was true of Lily. Over the following weeks, what began as a single conversation on a garden bench became something steadier. They did not rush it. There were coffee mornings after school drop-off, a shared table at a farmer's market, an evening when Elena brought over a casserole because Daniel mentioned offhand that he had not cooked a real meal in days, and stayed to eat it with him and Lily at the kitchen table while Oliver and Lily argued happily over whose turn it was to feed the goldfish. There were harder moments, too, an afternoon when Elena admitted, her voice breaking slightly, that she still felt guilty for being happy, as though happiness were a betrayal of the husband she had lost. And Daniel did not try to talk her out of the guilt, but simply sat with her while she felt it, which she said afterward was the first time anyone had done that instead of rushing to reassure her. Not everything about those months was easy. Daniel's mother, who had watched her son struggle through the wreckage of his marriage and had appointed herself the guardian of his caution, expressed concern one Sunday dinner that he was moving too fast, that he barely knew this woman, that Lily had already lost one version of a stable family and did not need to risk attaching to another that might not last. Daniel listened to her because he respected her and because some small, frightened part of him agreed with her, but he told her that he had spent 2 years being careful, being slow, being so guarded that he had nearly forgotten what it felt like to let anyone in, and that caution had its place, but it was not the same thing as living. He said that what he felt sitting beside Elena on that bench was not recklessness, it was recognition. The particular clarity of finding someone who did not require him to explain the parts of himself that grief had rearranged. There was a harder night, too, in early autumn, when Elena called him in tears after Oliver had asked her, out of nowhere at bath time, whether Daniel was going to be his new dad, and whether that meant he had to stop loving his real one. Elena had not known what to say in the moment, and she told Daniel afterward that the question had unearthed a fear she had been avoiding. The fear that building something new with him might somehow diminish what Oliver still held for the father he had lost. Or worse, that it might ask Oliver to choose. Daniel drove over that same night, sat with her at her kitchen table long after both children were asleep, and told her that love was not a fixed pie that had to be divided into smaller and smaller pieces. A child's heart, he said, was not built that way, and neither, he suspected, was hers. He did not pretend to have the perfect words for Oliver. He said only that he would be glad whenever Oliver was ready to talk to him honestly, not as a replacement for anyone, but as someone who wanted to know him. Elena cried harder at that, but it was, she told him later, a different kind of crying than she had done in a long time, not the exhausted, solitary grief of the last 3 years, but the relief of no longer carrying something alone. The following week, Daniel found himself sitting cross-legged on Oliver's bedroom floor, helping him build a small wooden model airplane, and somewhere between handing over pieces and steadying glued joints, Oliver asked him plainly, in the unguarded way children ask enormous questions, if Daniel liked his mom. Daniel said that he did, very much, and that he would never try to take the place of Oliver's father, whom he knew Oliver loved and missed, but that he hoped, in time, there might be room in Oliver's life for him too, in whatever way felt right to Oliver. Oliver considered this with the seriousness of a much older person, then simply said okay, and asked if Daniel wanted to help him paint the wings blue. Daniel said he would like nothing more, and something in his chest, something that had been clenched tight for 2 years, finally loosened. Months later, at another one of Marcus's backyard parties, this one for the 4th of July, Daniel and Elena arrived together, their children running ahead of them toward the yard where fireflies were beginning to blink on in the dusk. Marcus's wife, watching them from the porch, said quietly to her husband that it was remarkable, the two of them, considering how the whole thing had started with a woman sitting alone on a bench nobody else had noticed. Marcus said that was exactly why it worked, because it had never been about noise or performance, only about one quiet person choosing to see another. Late that evening, after the fireworks had faded and the children had fallen asleep on a blanket in the grass, Daniel and Elena sat together on the same bench where they had first met, and Elena said she used to think that being noticed loudly was the only kind of being noticed that counted, the kind with big gestures and grand declarations. She said she had learned, this year, that the quiet kind of noticing, someone simply crossing a room to sit beside you and ask nothing in return, could change a life more thoroughly than anything loud ever could. Daniel took her hand, and neither of them said anything else for a long while because for the first time in a long time, the silence between them did not feel like loneliness. It felt like home. What Daniel did that night was not extraordinary. He did not say anything remarkable or perform any grand gesture. He simply noticed someone the rest of the room had overlooked, and he crossed the distance to sit beside her. But sometimes that is all it takes. Not a rescue, not a fix, just the decision to see someone, and to let them know they are not as alone as they feel. If this story reminded you that the smallest acts of attention can change everything, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this one.